Democrats are coming together today to confront the voting rights crisis, just as it nears a breaking point in Washington, D.C. and all across the country. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee was arrested last night at a D.C. voting rights protest. She becomes the third Democratic lawmaker to be arrested in as many weeks. That was ahead of a meeting that concluded within the last hour between President Joe Biden and the top Democrats in Congress, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, to discuss their party's efforts to finally put together and pass major federal voting rights legislation that is urgently needed given the intensifying state-by-state assault on free and fair elections. One of the main battlegrounds, as you all know, of course, Texas. We're all aware of the Democratic lawmakers who fled their state in order to block voting restrictions from being enacted there. They now face increasing pressure. But today in a press conference, they also expressed optimism that they are making progress in Washington after their testimony yesterday on Capitol Hill.
I know our federal lawmakers have heard us. The Republican congressmen on the committee may not have liked it, but they heard us. They heard us when we told them how their colleagues back in Texas are making it harder than ever to vote. And I know that they will remember our testimony over the next few weeks as new proposals move to provide us the federal voter protection that we need. When the stakes are our right to vote, then we must go all out and be all in to do what's necessary.
Joining us now, the Reverend Al Sharpton, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation and the president of the National Action Network. Also joining us, my friend, former RNC chairman Michael Steele. Rev, I want to say this about the Texas lawmakers. I've interviewed a few of them on this program, Jasmine Crockett, Representative Bernal, and others. They changed the conversation by saying, we don't need anything that's been drafted. What we need is 1 inch. We need something. We need something more than nothing. And it was almost like this, it just changed the alchemy of the debate in Washington. Do you feel that way? And are you optimistic that something will get done?
I do share that something may be done. On Wednesday, Martin Luther King III and his wife, Andrea, and I met with them, the delegation from Texas. In fact, we took them to the Martin Luther King Monument. And we also met with the Majority Leader Schumer and Pelosi, and we met with Manchin and Lindsey Graham, met with a host of people. And I'm starting to see, at least on the Democratic side, that there's a determination to see something done. When we met with Mr. Senator Schumer, he had just met with the 8 Democrats in his office trying to frame something, and Manchin was part of those conversations. I think all of that started with these Texas legislators that made the sacrifice to come to Washington and stay out of Texas to make sure they could not have a quorum and ramrod these bills through. And I think in that gap, we have an opportunity for the Democrats to unite around some common sense proposals like they're talking about, making sure we extend early voting and protect the fact that you can't nullify voting at the polls, what they're trying to do in Georgia with selecting the county committees or the election authorities. But we still have to deal with the issue of the filibuster or the carve-out. Yeah. That's where the rubber's going to meet the road. Whatever they come up with, we have to deal with, will we get around the 60 vote? And that is going to be what is critical, which is why we must keep rallying all over the country and ultimately August 28th in Washington with a mass march.
You know, Michael Steele, this isn't a process problem, though. This is a problem of will. It's a problem of passion, because the same Washington in which this president passed with only his own party transformational legislation under the banner of the COVID relief package, and now bipartisan, hugely important and impactful legislation in the infrastructure package. Those were just as difficult, but there was a will there. And my question for you is, do you see the same will around not just protecting access to the polls, but preventing people's votes from being nullified by what's happening in Georgia, which is the nightmare scenario, that state's voter suppression law also rigged who counts the votes?
Whose will are you talking about? Is the will among the Democrats? Sure, there is. Is the will among the Republicans? I haven't seen it yet. And even in the space of what the Democrats are doing, what is the work? because the reality of it is, as the Rev just aptly put on the table, despite the optimism, there's still the reality that requires the work. And the reality is 60 votes. And the work is, how do you get that? I think, and it's kind of funny. I was sitting here laughing and I was listening to the Rev. I said, I'm going to come off as the radical one in this. And whoever thought I would be more radical than Reverend Sharpton? But I think we should be. There should be not just on August 28th. I mean, there should be a concerted national effort. People need to understand this is fundamental. This is fundamental. There is no republic if there's no vote. There is no republic if any state legislature in this country can make it harder for one citizen, let alone a community of citizens, to access the ballot box. So, I'd like to see that passion, because behind the will, that passion will provoke the work. And I think for me, at least, and for, I'm in the voting space at US Vote Foundation. I work with a number of other non-profits and nonpartisan groups around the country in this space. And that's the animating principle. Let's get the citizens, because when the citizens are looking their legislators in the eye, Nicole, and telling them, don't you get this wrong, because your name going to be on that ballot that you think I'm not going to access come next November. And I think fundamentally that begins to change the nature of the will that leads to the kind of work that gets you the 60 votes you need.
So, Rev, I'm over here with Radical Michael Steele on this one, and I think you're being too nice. I mean, here's the message that I would say. If you don't do this, this will be the last infrastructure bill this country ever sees as a federal government. If you don't protect the right to vote, there will never be anything approximating the COVID relief package. If you don't protect the right to vote, we will never have Democratic majorities in the House and Senate again, ever. And most likely there will never be another Democratic president. Those are the stakes of leaving the 389 voter suppression and voter nullification laws racing through 48 states on the books, which is what happens if there isn't federal legislation. Is it time to get meaner?
Well, I think that you haven't heard us speak yet. You've heard us deal with the preliminaries of organizing. You won't think I'm too nice when we get finished with we're in Georgia, we're organizing. And the science of organizing is you always give the people the opportunity to expose themselves. So when you do come with the meanness, people could say they tried to negotiate. They tried to talk to you. And we always try to have conversation before confrontation. But confrontation is coming. You are literally talking about people sitting up deciding whether or not they're going to protect our right to vote. And that is the most insulting, offensive, anti-American thing you could do. But we want them to be real clear, which is why before we go into Georgia next week and other places building toward August 28th, we went and sat with Manchin. We went and sat with Lindsey Graham. Are y'all very clear now that y'all are not going to protect our right to vote? Because then when we come back and say, even to the Democrats, we did not elect you to come here and have no backbone in Washington. We don't hear anything other than our right to vote, because we can't get George Floyd bill or anything else if we don't have our vote. You have no excuse. You can't sit up and say you didn't understand what we were saying. You didn't give us a chance. We came and heard you all. Now either you're going to act or we're going to act. And the action comes now. That's why Sheila Jackson Lee went to jail yesterday. That's why Melanie Campbell's been organizing in Washington, others in Georgia, others in Texas. That's how they built up the movement to get the Voting Rights Act in the first place. You had SNCC in Mississippi, you had CORE in the Carolinas, you had Dr. King dealing in Alabama with Selma. It has always been different actions that led up to the ultimate move. So this is scientifically organized. You don't start with rage. You build that rage up toward achieving something. So you're not having a fit, you're having a movement.